Hey, EJ.
Hello, hello.
Hey, we got Mel here now too.
Hi, EJ. How's it going?
Hey, very nice to meet you. Thank you for joining as well.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, this is very exciting, very exciting.
We're definitely excited.
So we can, yeah, should we go into it? Not got much time, so I'm going to skip past. I had a load of questions written down. What's it like being married to Christopher Ho? What's it like to hear his voice every day? What does he smell like? We'll skip past those.
I do have time, so we don't have to rush too much. We can take our time and do the questions, no problem. Okay.
Okay, so I'll put those questions back at the end then, and maybe we can loop back. Um, so yeah, the first thing I think to talk about is so you are working on this cool new game called Founders together, and I was interested to know like how you came to do this, like what provoked this, what's like the process been a little bit so far, what kind of inspired you to do this thing?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been playing board games for pretty much my whole life. Mel and I actually got married super young. We got married almost. I guess I'm looking at her.
I'm just pausing
Um,
and letting him fill in the
try,
blanks, but I'm also trying to
try,
think about the year. I think
try.
it's been 8 years,
Yeah,
but
8 years.
just
We
pretend.
got married 8 years ago, in our early 20s, which is, pretty rare nowadays. Um, and I kind of introduced board games to her, when we started dating, I guess, 10 years ago. And we've both had this kind of fascination with starting businesses, and I started a business and have grown it to be a pretty large enterprise, which has been super exciting and awesome in my career. And Mel as well has had some incredible entrepreneurial outcomes, and so it's kind of this culmination of the thing that we love, the thing that has been our hobby and something that's brought us together, and then us kind of turning our entrepreneurial eyes towards it, and it's very meta as well. And I'll let Mel answer, kind of this part of it, but the game is about running an e-commerce company and shipping product, and that's what we're kind of doing with this board game as well. So it's just super exciting and super fun to think about the business piece of it. And I'll let Mel answer her side of the question there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in terms of like origins of the game and how we got here, a lot of it is just like a passion for board games, and that really didn't start. I think the first game of Scrabble I ever played was with Chris about 10 years ago. And then from there, he very carefully sort of ratcheted up the complexity of games that we played. And I think through the pandemic, we were, that was something that we spent a lot of time doing, a lot of worker placement games. And then I took like a little bit of a sabbatical a couple years ago, and apparently Chris has had it on his list for a long time. We were just debating this beforehand, um, to build a game. But a couple years ago, I took a couple months off, and I thought, you know what, let's just try. Let's just like jot down some ideas. And the very first version of Founder was actually very bad. It wasn't fun at all. And it still took a lot of components from like some of our favorite games, but I remember we had alpha tested it not online but just with like some friends, and we all kind of looked at each other and I was like, this is not fun, right? And they're like,
It was more Azul like. Azul's a great game, but it was kind of this like, collect pieces from a central board and it just didn't flow.
yeah, it wasn't
Yeah.
good. And then I think this past year I dove really deeply back into it, and I was like, let's build it up from the ground up. So it's been very fun.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's very cool to have worked on this together for sure. Sounds good. And because you guys have played quite a lot of Agricola together, right? So is that a sort of an influence or a bit of an inspiration for it?
I would say definitely. That's probably the board game that, through the pandemic, that we spent a lot of time into. I'm a big over the board player. I definitely am not as active in the online community as Chris is. But yeah, I would say Agricola. We also like lots of, like really simple but elegant games, like Chris mentioned, like Azul. what are some of the other ones that we love? We played a lot of 2-player games also during the pandemic, like Battle Line or Seven Wonders Duel and Hive. So we like a lot of like tile, like just like we like the feel of some of the pieces and when you're moving things around too. So
100%. Yeah, Splendor is another good one. And so, kind of when we started looking at building a game, kind of the pinnacle of games, right? Or the pinnacle of building a beautiful game is something that is easy to learn and hard to master, right? You want it to be immediately graspable. No one likes reading large rule books or anything like that. And you want the game to be enduring. And to be enduring, it needs to be repeatable and it needs to give you like a deep amount of satisfaction when you play it, right? Obviously, the most famous game in the history of the world is chess, right? It's incredibly easy to learn. It's very tactile. You can understand it. There's a lot of corollaries to like chess and life, right? It's really interesting game there. And then when you also look at the history of board games, like the first giant commercial success of a board game was Monopoly, right? Again, beautiful aesthetically, masterful from a branding perspective, like these beautiful tokens, this like bright, vivid colors, really easy to understand how to play the game. You could play it almost immediately, very intuitive. And, the piece that obviously doesn't work with Monopoly and modern board gaming is that there's far too much luck involved, and it breaks a lot of like the basic elements of what makes a really good board game around kind of strategy and replayability, and figuring out kind of like what the time boxing of a game should be, and giving you kind of this sense of satisfaction. But Monopoly again did some beautiful things, right? And then obviously I'm skipping over tons of board game history, but there's this wonderful game in Catan as well, another dice rolling game. So us hardos in the board game community, don't have quite as much love for it, but it did so many things right. Brings people around a table, is a striking game, has this incredible dynamic board. And so, when you look at the history of board games and the ones that were incredibly commercially successful, and then also the ones that were critically successful, you have all these different elements of what you want to put into your game, and it's been fascinating looking at that and then trying to respect that and build that into our game as well.
Nice. Yeah, I sort of want to come back to Monopoly a bit, because when I saw you mentioned it, and I initially I was like, oh, Monopoly, interesting. But now, having played Founder, I see where you're coming from with it, and I kind of get where you're going with that. But let's kind of talk about like in broad sense without explaining all the rules and stuff, but like, what is the game? What are the kind of like mechanisms? What are players doing when they play? And also, where do you see it in terms of like a light, heavy sort of complexity of the game?
yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So the general theme of Founder, or the lore behind it, is that every player is an entrepreneur and a founder of a new business looking to sell something online. And over the course of the year, yourself and you can play 2 to 4 players, you're going to be investing time and effort into different parts of a business. So you're going to make product, ship product, find new customers, and hopefully generate a profit. It's meant to be fairly lightweight. So a big part of board games for me is I always really I really love the games, as Chris mentioned, that are really elegant, that they're, of course, they're replayable and all those different things, but they don't, they don't give you a headache after, or you're not like head in your hands partway through being like, how do I dig myself out of this hole? Or, especially with Agricola, how do you feed your family? Which is always, a sad reality, like in around 8 or 9 for me. But it is a Euro style worker placement game. We took a lot of mechanics from other games that we loved, that we were really inspired by, but was still strategic enough that you can build an engine, and you can play different lines for how you can win. So there's a little bit, I would say, if I had to compare it, I think elements are just sort of even Puerto Rico in it, where you have to really watch your competition and what they're doing. There's a couple different lines that you can take. And so it's a little bit different every time.
agree. I think I can see all of those things coming through, and I get at this point, I'd sort of like noted down what had grabbed me about it when I started playing on the Board Game Arena alpha version, and it kind of it sort of matches where you're going with it. I think because it's got that worker placement mechanism and the bidding for turn order as well, which is a really nice mechanic. I like that. But it's the simplicity of how you have done it, where you bid for turn order, you pay so many. What is the currency called? Are they founder dollars? What are we calling the currency?
It's funny. You probably noticed this alpha testing it, but there's definitely some terminology that we need to. You can see our indecision around certain things that have come through that you guys are. But I think they're going to be called founds, like a pound, but like pounds. But we're open to suggestions if anybody wants to send them in or add them to the Discord.
That'll make EJ happy because that's his home,
Yeah. A nod to the Euro style.
Founds is good. I'm voting for founds. That's good. So yeah, you bid for your turn order with founds, and that's just a simple bid. And then you have, as it is currently, you have one worker. You have a selection of 9 actions, is it? And you place your worker, and you get that action, and that will either give you stock, or sell your stock, or give you customers, or do some sort of like other fairly simple actions. And when I first played it, that like real kind of pure simplicity of that bidding mechanism and the worker placement mechanism, I was like, this is great. And it reminded me of Ra when I've played Ra, because Ra, the bidding on Ra is so pure and simple, and that's where when I've played Ra, I was like, I could imagine teaching this to my family, my parents. Like, it's this like simple mechanism that is easy to grasp. And that's when I played it, I was like, this is how I could imagine, like, and we come back to Monopoly, like at Christmas with the family, instead of getting Monopoly out, you get Founder out. And it's a really good way to potentially introduce those kind of like newer people who aren't familiar with those mechanisms. This is how like bidding works in board games, and this is how worker placement works in board games. And it's and then as well, you've got some cards with powers as the founders in the game. It's a running joke to bash Agricola a bit in the Discord as we've been talking so much, but Agricola is obviously a fantastic game, all joking aside. But I saw this and I was like, maybe if I'd have like played this before I played Agricola as my first worker placement game, it would be a better introduction to that kind of worker placement mechanism, this sort of pure way that you guys have done it. So that's like kind of where I see this game, and that's where I was really interested. Is like, this would be a great kind of gateway game to those sort of mechanisms.
That's we're beaming over here, and I will say your comment in Discord was screenshotted and shared with my family for sure, and some of my friends, because we were so flattered to hear that, because there's so much of that was the intention in building Founder in the first place. I remember when we were playing board games, I remember telling Chris, I was like, I wish that I had played board games like this a little bit more when I was a kid, because you can learn so much about decision making. I think in the Discord we've mentioned Monopoly a couple of times, and at the time, real estate was really the name of the game, of how people built empires. But today that's not the same for our generation or generations likely ahead of us. And part of the reason what we wanted to do with Founder is create something that reflected what I think is the way that people, or what we think is the way that people are gonna, change the world by building businesses and taking something they're really passionate about, and finding that entrepreneurship journey. So we love that you might think that it's a nice introduction to folks, because that's really what we hope for it to be.
Yeah, for sure. I'm interested to hear where you sort of think of it, because also I'm aware that you've shared this with a group of kind of heavy board gamers in the Terra Mystica community, and those heavy board gamers immediately kind of jumped to like, oh, we could add this, and you could have extra workers that get sort of like brought in at different points and get amortized, and you could add like an extra pricing mechanic, or it could have like variable costs. And it's like, oh, that stuff's all great, but then there's a danger there that you sort of lose that kind of good simplistic thing that is like a pure kind of beginning that you guys have got to start with.
Yeah, it's funny. This is the literal tension between Chris and I. Tension is great in lots of situations, but yeah, between Chris and I, it's really easy with a game to add more rules and more dynamics, because especially as you've already got a base of playing that game. But when you then put yourself back into the shoes of someone who's never played it, that thick rule book, which is one thing that's really daunting for me, but I don't think is daunting for Chris. That is something that I personally really want to avoid. I want to keep it simple and elegant as much as we can while being balanced and replayable. Yeah, but I know Chris and likewise many of the Terra Mystica community have really, really great ideas. And so we have lots to run through, lots of scenarios to run through and debate what we will add and what we'll keep really, really simple.
It's such an interesting thing building a game, because like Mel said, and this mirrors it mirrors great writing and really great creation, right? Kind of like all the famous artists. It's so much harder to make something simple than it is to make something complicated. All the famous writers, right? It's so much harder to write something simple than it is to write something complicated. And most of what makes something really beautiful is how simple you can keep it, or how much you can take away and still make it function in the way that you want it to. Add in at least one restriction, and it will make you more creative than you could be without the restriction. And the restriction that I keep trying to place on myself is, this needs to be something that you could play with your family at Christmas. This needs to be something that you can play in, call it an average of 15 minutes per player, right? So if you're playing a 4-player game, you can get it done in under an hour. And the more rules that you add, the more unlikely that becomes, right, over and over and over again. And so it is just this really interesting battle between, some of my natural tendencies to add in a bunch of cool shit without, ruining the game for what the intended audience is, right? So
yeah, that all sounds exactly right. I guess the other thing though you want it to hold up, or at once, the dream is for it to then kind of work at the higher levels, and people who have played it before and sort of expert board gamers to still find depth in a game. And I have no idea how you achieve that, but I guess that's the other aim on the other end of things, is keep it simple but have that depth for those that want it.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the practical ways that you achieve that is just making the something that I kind of all entrepreneurs learn over time, is that you end up almost always tending to ship too late, right? Ship too late, meaning you hold your cards back to your chest for too long. You wait to release everything all at once. I think what we've done here is, and this is where I've been so fortunate to be part of these wonderful online board game communities, with the Agricola community, with the Terra Mystica community, with the with you guys, EJ, and the Fire 2 guys, and the WBC guys, and the Terra Mysticon guys. Like, with everyone, it's a bunch of board game hardos. Was fantastic, because they'll find a bunch of stuff that's wrong with the game, the mechanics, identify what those mistakes are, and hopefully lead us towards something that the thing that I really want you to feel a sense of accomplishment in that game. That's incredibly important, I think, for a very strong game. So I'm really trying to make that work.
What stage are you at now? Like, I love the meta thing of you saying, like, the thing that you struggle with in entrepreneurship is waiting to ship too much, and you could equally be talking about making this game, or you could be talking about at what point you put your worker on the ship orders space in the game. Like, that really like speaks to your kind of the meta way of it working. But yeah, what kind of what stage are you at? Is this like near the beginning, or do you view this as like being quite close to being a finished product? How do you see that?
So I'll talk a little bit about it, and then I'll pass it over to Mel, who really is, leading the project more so than myself. I think that the piece that people don't know, like, and this is actually speaking to, again, we're speaking to a board game community. I think probably a lot of people have thought about, what would it take for me to make a game? I think making the actual game is something like 10 to 20% of the work involved in bringing a game to market. And this idea of bringing a game to market encapsulates so many different things, right? It encapsulates making sure that there is demand for what you're producing, right? You have to figure out how to distribute it, right? Physically distribute it, and then also from a demand perspective, generate that demand. There's lots of different channels that you can do that with, right? You can do a Kickstarter and get a bunch of pre-orders, which is really great for the board game community because of how it comes together. You could run meta ads on Instagram and Facebook for Christmas stuff. You could go through and get physical, shelf space at lots of big board game stores and, hopefully some national distributors. But you have to figure out, first and foremost, can you get the product that you're building to the people that want to play it, right? You're solving the problem for them of, what's my next game going to be that I'm going to really sink my teeth into? And that's incredibly important. After you think about, okay, how am I going to distribute it? How am I going to generate that demand? You have to think about how am I actually going to manufacture it in a way where, I can do this and then make a little bit of profit. Or, in our case, the profit's not the number one priority. Our number one priority is building a beautiful game. But really what you need to be able to do is figure out how can you do this. And so you have to figure out the manufacturing piece of it. Who's going to manufacture the board game? How are you going to take orders? There's lots of awesome stores, Shopify in particular, incredible for taking orders and, helping with distribution and all of that kind of stuff. But trying to figure out kind of the supply chain of how you're actually going to produce this and then ship it and get it into the hands of those folks. All of that kind of stuff is stuff that we've been working on kind of in the background, concurrently building the game.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation. We're fairly early in the process in the sense that, you guys are seeing the alpha test now. We want to build a really, really great product. But in the background, a lot going on, I think, figuring out the manufacturing and branding and design and how we're actually going to launch our hopefully later this year. But if folks want to follow along, we have a website, www.playfounder.com, where people can get updates as we hopefully go live on Kickstarter in a handful of months.
Beautiful. And so from, people listening to this, which is mostly currently until we take over the world, the Terra Mystica community, what do you really want from people? Is it just keep playing it and keep feeding back on features and bugs and all of that great stuff that people in the founder Discord have been doing already?
Yeah, absolutely. I think having as many people who are really passionate about board games and see games and lines in different ways, play it as much as possible is awesome, because we'll just get a better product that will hopefully be, meet the expectations and the bar that we've set for it. So please help us there. I mean, in terms of the only thing I would say from an expectations perspective is as beautiful of a game as a Terra Mystica and Agricola are, is a degree of simplicity we hope to keep.
Yeah, what I'll add in there, EJ, is that, we're really lucky to be part of this community. The community has grown to be so incredible, right? In a lot of ways, play test it, give us feedback, be critical, and kind of, I feel like, this game is coming out of this community.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, for me, that is kind of, that goes through everything I wanted to talk about. I will introduce the game a little bit more in the preamble to this when this goes out. Is there anything else that you wanted to say or talk about regarding the game, or anything else?
It's a good question. I don't know.
Any details of what it's like to live with Chris Ho, Mel?
Well, I don't know a ton of Chris's online personality, but Chris is a great partner and definitely couldn't do this without him. And it's way more fun building a board game together than alone, I think, because you definitely can get a little bit in your own head. I think the only thing we'll say about Founder is we are, loving the feedback that we're getting, and we're really hoping that people continue to enjoy playing it as much as we did designing it. I don't know what other feelings really compare to having something in your mind and then bringing it to life and seeing other people use it and play with it. And that applies not just, for us, but everyone else, I think, out there who is an entrepreneur. So have fun.
Fantastic. This was really good to talk. I was really looking forward to talking to you guys about this. It's a really cool project. That is brilliant. We can finish this and speak soon, hopefully.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having us, EJ.